Hey, this is Bryce and thanks for tuning into my YouTube channel, Jacket Trades. In this video, I'm going to go over the repair of the drive unit for my e-bike, which I use to commute to and from work a couple times a week. At the beginning of the year, or closer to the beginning of the year, I was coming home from work and I had a drivetrain failure in the drive mechanism, or I guess the e-bike drive unit. I was able to power down the bike and pedal home manually, which is fine, but it's a little bit of a trek with a 60-pound bike, but it was fine. Once I got the bike home, I started tearing into it, tearing into that drive unit, trying to liberate it from the bike, and just to see what went wrong with it. So the bike is a Giant. I've had it for about so I got it in 2018, so 5 years now. I don't have a lot of wear and tear on it. I think I've got less than 5,000 miles, maybe closer to 6,000 now. But I've had a lot of problems with the bike, and in general I would not recommend it. I'm a bigger guy. I weigh in around 250, 260. I ride pretty hard. I got panniers on my bike, and then I'm kind of commuting. I'm averaging around 25 miles an hour, so I'm hitting bumps and ruts and potholes and whatnot. I've had issues with the chain rings, kind of the chain hopping on the chain rings, and I think it's due to frame flex. I've had issues. The major issue on that bike right now is the rear wheel. For whatever reason, I haven't been able to figure this out, and I've been working on bikes for over 30 years. I can't even count how many wheels I've built from scratch, but I've even designed wheels and built them up where I've machined my own hubs. But for whatever reason on that bike, it does not it blows through spokes. So I will break a spoke. Basically, my average is like every other ride I'll break a spoke, and I've gotten really good where I can replace a spoke in 10 minutes, and that's it. You know, that's pulling the wheel, pulling the cassette, or the brake rotor, depending which side the spoke breaks. Usually it's on the drive side that it breaks. And putting in a new spoke and doing a quick true up, on the frame, not on a truing stand. I've even built up that wheel with all new spokes. I went through and properly tensioned the spokes, and I still can't get it to not break spokes. So I don't know if it's just too much power going through the wheel, or if it's a heavy bike with a heavy rider, but for whatever reason it breaks spokes. It's been a headache ever since I've owned this bike. And the last thing that went wrong was this, the failure of the drive mechanism. So I got home, tore into it, and there was a nylon gear inside that had stripped. It had stripped out a couple of teeth. It's a helical gear, as we see here. I started looking for parts, and there are no parts available in the US. So anything I wanted, I would have to get through Europe. So this is kind of irritating because Giant is a fairly reputable manufacturer, and their support program is that you replace the drive unit for $700 or whatever, $800. It's not an inexpensive e-bike when you look at kind of what's available from the Chinese market. This is a relatively expensive bike, and their drive units, it's a Yamaha drive unit, and they're going for $700-800. The alternative to that is you can buy the gear unit so this gear unit has a bearing that's pressed in. Actually, no. In the original model, the bearing is overmolded on the gear, and it's a one-way bearing unit. You can buy that unit for $190 from Europe. That was kind of a tough pill to swallow as well. And then I started doing some research, and it's irritating because, well, the fact is that gear is overmolded, so it's kind of a one-piece unit with a one-way bearing. That's fine, whatever. But it's a nylon gear in an otherwise metal gear drivetrain, and so to me that screams that this is a consumable, right? This is something that we're going to give a single point of failure for the drivetrain so that it doesn't blow up the rest of the assembly. We have a failure point. However, if you're going to do that, you need to provide the tools and the information and the parts to allow shops to replace that part. If it's a kind of a single point of failure consumable part, you need to provide the program to replace that part. And that is where Giant kind of dropped the ball, because all of the parts are in Europe. The answer in the US for these shops is to replace the drive unit as a whole, which is a very expensive pill to swallow. So anywho, enough of my ranting about Giant and their lack of support for these products. There was a guy in Europe, another guy in Europe, who was making replacement gears, just the gear, not the whole one-way bearing assembly. And then he's making this out of fiber reinforced nylon, so it's a little bit stronger than the original nylon part. I believe, just kind of looking at the features of this gear, that it's a machined part versus a injection molded part. So what you do is you press out that one-way bearing from the overmolded gear when it strips, and then it drops into this new gear, and it's such that it doesn't have to be overmolded. It can drop in, and there's these kind of key index points here that carry the torque from that one-way bearing to the gear, but it doesn't have to be overmolded necessarily. And then because we have a helical gear, we're going to get some thrust forces on this, but it's such that those thrust forces actually want to push this into that one-way bearing versus pulling off of the one-way bearing. So it wants to stay together as an assembly as you apply torque through this gear. So that's a good thing, which means that as a slip fit assembly, it works fine. I have noticed that it's a little bit noisier than my original drivetrain, but I'm usually wearing kind of earplugs anyways because it's noisy on my route to and from work. So I don't notice it when I'm riding necessarily. But being that the guy was from Europe and it's kind of a bespoke type of product, I ordered 2 gears. So I have the one that's installed on the bike now, and then I have my spare backup in case that one ever fails on me. And these weren't super expensive. They aren't cheap. So the one-way unit with the overmolded gear from Giant was 180 bucks. These gears are $65 each, so I bought 2 of them. So it's still a cheaper alternative to buying that one-way unit. And in theory, these are going to be stronger because they're fiber reinforced. So this video kind of walks through that process. It was a frustrating process because I bought the gear, I waited a couple weeks for it to show up, got the gear, then I was digging into it, and the drive unit there's a bunch of exposed electronics inside of it along with the gear train, so you have kind of drivetrain, which is lubricated with grease, and you've got electronics and boards that are also exposed, and I didn't want to use the wrong grease that would potentially damage the electronics. As I was digging into it, I kind of had to pause the work. I had to order the grease. Again, it's only available from Europe, which I think is total BS, because this Giant sells bikes all over the world, including the US. They have a significant market in the US, or at least I think they do. And for them not to offer these types of kind of consumables for their bikes is ridiculous. So anyways, there's one shop in Europe that's basically buying these 5-gallon buckets of grease, and they're repackaging them into little 2-ounce cups of grease, so that people with these drive units from Yamaha can service their drive units. So I had to order some grease, waited another week or so for it to show up. and finally I was able to kind of put the bike back together and get it up and running. As of the filming of this video, I've got about 900 miles on that drive unit with the new gear, the replacement gear, and so far, so good. Ironically, for the filming of this video, I went out on a little ride just to kind of show, and I had a bunch of other stuff go wrong on me, where, again, I am not impressed with this bicycle. I need to get my money's worth out of the bike. I will use it until it falls apart, until I can no longer fix it. But just on the stupid test ride, and some of it was my fault. I was like shifting, and the camera mount was in the way of the derailleur, the rear derailleur, and so it caused the cable to develop a lot of slack, which disengaged it. Basically disengaged from my shifter, and then I couldn't figure out what was going on with my shifter because it wouldn't shift anymore. I mean, I figured out that the camera mount was blocking the derailleur. I fixed that, but then the cable was disengaged, and it took a while to kind of figure that out. And then at the same time, unrelated to that, the chain got I had downshifted on my front chainring. And that's the other thing. This bike has a front derailleur with a high-low chainring, and to be honest, you don't need that. I only ride with the larger chainring. There's enough range of gears in the rear cassette, which is a 10-speed cassette, to get the full range from climbing to max speed. The front chainring, having a derailleur, a 2-speed on the front is completely unnecessary, and I think it also contributes to the chain kind of skipping if I try to put too much torque into the cranks. So I downshifted, and the chain got sucked in between the frame of the bike. Actually, it's the drive unit of the bike and that lower chainring, because it overshot that lower chainring, and it got sucked in. And it got sucked in so bad that it actually twisted the chain 180 degrees, which damaged the chain, and then it ended up scraping out a bunch of aluminum shrapnel from the drive unit. And it was just, this is the first time I've ever seen this happen on any bike. You know, when it rains, it pours. And this is just, I've got 900 miles on this bike, and I was just trying to do it, get some footage with a couple of GoPros for this video, and everything kind of went to crap in the process. But at the end of the day, I worked out all the issues. I fixed the bike. Everything's up and running. The shifters work. The chain is fine, or fixed. And we got the footage that we needed, and the bike is running. And I commute 2 to 3 days a week. It's a 14-mile one-way ride, so 28 miles round trip. So I'm doing about 60 to 90 miles a week on the bike. So I kind of count on it being reliable, with the exception of the spokes having to be replaced every so often, or at least once a week. I'm replacing. I'll let spokes break, then I'll just run them until I get 2 spokes that are broken, and then I'll go in and replace the 2 spokes. So basically once a week I'm replacing spokes. Other than that, the bike is pretty much maintenance free. Without further ado, sorry, this is kind of a long-winded conversation about this bike, but I will go ahead and share the footage of the repair. Thank you for tuning in and watching. I appreciate it. Take care. This is the gear that's stripped, and we got some new ones. I believe that these are actually machined gears, not molded gears. These are, I think they're fiber reinforced nylon. So the original, this insert was over molded in this gear, and now with the aftermarket machined assembly, that just drops in like so. Alright, so the grease for this is called Multemp AC-N. It's only available in Europe. The gearbox case is sealed up with some kind of a liquid gasket. I'm going to use, since it's a Yamaha product, I'm going to go ahead and use Yamabond 4 to seal this up. I've used that on other engine cases and it works fine. But my tube dried up, so I have to go ahead and order another tube of that stuff as well. And then I just need to finish cleaning up these sealing surfaces. Just scraping off the old gasket. Alright, so it's been a couple weeks. We got our Yamabond, which is basically kind of a liquid gasket. And then we got our multi-temp ACN grease. It doesn't look like the original grease. It's a different color, but it is, I mean, this is kind of rebadged. Yamaha doesn't actually make this. It's made by a different company than this company, this e-bike motor center. They kind of repackage it and sell it, but it's supposed to be the original grease. So with this drive unit, so we freewheel that direction, we pedal this direction. So this larger gear, or spur gear if you want to call it, is spinning clockwise, which means, and then we freewheel on this nylon drive gear with that one-way drive assembly. But you can see that pinion gear essentially is spinning counterclockwise, which means this is spinning counterclockwise, which means yeah, this is the nylon gear spinning counterclockwise. So the helical drive pinion gear is spinning clockwise, and then that, because it is a helical gear, it imparts a thrust into that gear, and in this case that thrust is up or away from this assembly as we see it now. So the thrust is out of the gearbox, which wants to push this up, which is fine because that's how the gear is designed, where this gear sits on this drive unit. It slips on in that direction, then that drive unit, there's a lip there because this is stepped, and so you get those thrust forces kind of pushing this nylon gear in this direction, but it can't go any further because it has a shoulder that it sits on. If we had thrust going that direction, it would want to push the gear off the drive unit into the gear case body, which is not what we would want. So I have a little more confidence that this is, even though this is not overmolded, it's just a slip fit. It's kind of addressing all the forces that this gear is seeing. All right, let's get this greased up now. There are these weird funky like rubber pads that go in here. These are this must be like thermal tape kind of, or thermally conducting material, because they contact these little ICs here on this board, so they probably get heat off that IC to the case body, or to the drive unit body. So that's kind of a heat transfer or heat management function. So don't forget to put these on. And they actually sent some additional material, but it's nowhere near thick enough. You can see the difference in thickness between those materials there. So I'm going to reuse these. So I lost the key for this, and so I had to kind of destroy it to get it out. So I ordered a new one. So this is a giant battery lock assembly, only from Europe. So US sold bikes with no parts support in the entire country. You have to go to Europe to get these parts. Doesn't make sense. I'm very frustrated. But whatever, suck it up, right? This basically locks the battery in place so someone doesn't walk off with it. Okay, there's the assembly. So then we install this into the bike with 2 screws, and then this little cover plate clips into place and gets held in with 4 screws.